as essentially trade and exporting. So for hotels, for food and bev, for ag, for vineyards, certainly all the ports activities, that all counts as an export, even though it's occurring here domestically. So it's a little bit of a wonky way to think about the data, but you can see there that travel and tourism's in the top 5 in terms of sectors that we're exporting, even though certainly most if not all of that activity is occurring here. Next slide. So in terms of growth, this is looking at 2010 to 2017. This is growth in terms of dollars. So percentages are a little bit deceiving. If it's a very small sector and it grows by a little bit, it can look as like a huge percentage. Here, we really want to look at dollars. So when we look at agriculture, we're producing almost 500 million more than we did in 2010. So this is the largest growth sector, certainly. But you see other related fields to that in terms of food manufacturing, et cetera. So it's ag plus some of the downstream and other value add manufacturing processes also are a large contributor and growing part of the economy. Next slide. So when you look at the makeup of what we're producing, it's largely goods. And this is much different than in many other places. So nationally, when you look at the jobs that are supporting trade, we go back to the early 2000s, it was roughly 50% of the jobs nationally were in goods exporting, 50% in services. In Oregon at that time, it was 70% were in goods, 30% were in services. Today, nationally, less than half. So about 39% of all jobs are goods producing. So the majority of jobs in trade are actually service oriented. And this aligns with the narrative in terms of the hollowing out of the manufacturing sector nationally. In Oregon, we're much different. We're the second state nationally in terms of manufacturing as a share of our economy behind Indiana. So we're always up there in terms of manufacturing, and that directly translates here in terms of we're still producing roughly 57% of all jobs are still producing goods rather than exporting services. So this is different than Washington even, and certainly much different than Oregon. So when we get into some of the specifics about how different trade agreements might impact Oregon differently, if you're exporting services, you're not necessarily needing a lot of supply chain and other intermediate production goods. You're just producing and exporting services. Here in Oregon, we rely on lots of intermediate goods, and many of those are sourced internationally in order to be competitive on national and international markets. Next slide. So when we look at what we're producing, oftentimes the value and the volume don't align. And as the port, I think you guys are intimately aware of kind of these nuanced differences. When we look at, for example, China, they're our number one trade partner by value. Roughly 20% of all of our exports are through China. Japan is our number one trade partner by volume. So Japan, in terms of volume, is about 30%, whereas it's only 10% of the value. So what we can see is there's this difference in terms of we're exporting high value goods to some places like Canada, for example, where the volume is much lower than the value, and more ag and other commodities to places like Japan and South Korea where the volume exceeds the value. And you can see the rank order of these are our top 10 trading partners. So what is it that we're importing? I think when we look at this, we can again see why trade relationships with, say, Canada and Oregon might be more important than China, because we're sourcing 70% of the goods we import from Canada are used directly in supply chain for value add production, versus in China, it's 30%. Vietnam is the exact opposite of that. We're only using about 10% of those. Those are primarily finished goods that we're importing. So when we think about tariffs, for example, and who pays the tariff, there's certainly debate amongst in the political realm. Economists generally side on the fact that the consumers are the ones who are paying the tariffs. But certainly when we look at value add production, there could be incidents where employers are sharing in that cost versus the producers, versus if it's a finished good, that falls entirely on the consumer. Next slide. So let's focus a little bit on Portland specifically. The report was largely focused on Oregon, but I think here we want to take a little bit of a deeper dive in terms of the Portland Metro and certainly the activities of the port here and also the port in Vancouver. So next slide. In terms of rank of GDP as a share of exports, Portland is number 14. So again, right at the top in terms of importance of trade to the region, similar to the state at number 12. this can't be emphasized enough. When we're talking about when trade is being impacted, there are very few places statewide or at the metro level that are going to feel the brunt of that, as we would here in Portland, and as we are beginning to, as the various policies extend into well over a year now. Next slide. What that means is there are almost 77,000 people directly employed in trade and really exports in the region. So it's a big number of people that we would start to see impacts of not extending or signing new trade agreements, et cetera. Next slide. In Portland, it's $20 billion in terms of goods and services. So statewide, $26 billion, as you would expect. The lion's share in terms of the value is located here in Portland. The jobs are much more evenly distributed, certainly with ag being less valuable than some of the semiconductors and other products we're exporting. But $20 billion in terms of goods and services. Through the ports, roughly $8.8 billion are moving through the region's ports. So that's Port of Vancouver and certainly Port of Portland in terms of what's moving through. And this is an important kind of distinction. We want to look at what we're producing here isn't necessarily what we're shipping here. So when we look at agriculture, for example, much more agriculture is shipped through the ports facilities than we produce here domestically in the state. So we're using intermodal and other sources of transportation to bring goods to Portland, from which then they're exported worldwide. So this is an important part to understand of what it is we're actually exporting. So next slide. And we can see that it's, essentially wheat and then cars are kind of the main two in terms of value of what we're exporting here. And certainly we're not producing cars in Oregon. So this is an important distinction to understand. What we produce here is different than what we ship from the region. And you guys sit at the forefront of that, deep understanding of those nuances of what we're producing versus what we're shipping. Next slide. So wrapping this up, why does trade matter? Next slide. Again, trade fuels research and innovation in the region. So when we look at Oregon, where we sit nationally in terms of the types of things we're producing, if we're going to be successful on the global market, we have to be producing goods that are constantly competitive. We're not just extracting natural resources and selling those on the global market. So, and as a result of that, we're getting the benefits. The problem that would come from protectionist policies are certainly loss of market access. So when we're exporting to the world and we have counter tariffs in place, the demand for that can drop. Secondly, small businesses are less resilient in terms of being able to absorb drastic changes to supply chain or other costs. So that's an important piece too in understanding where those impacts may fall. And the bottom line is consumers are going to pay more for goods, given that we're trading so much here, that's just an inevitable part of what happens in protectionist policies. So with that, thank you for your time. Happy to field any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Questions?
Thanks for the report. What finding or findings surprised you the most in your report?
So I think here in the region, we think of the trade relationships we have with the Pacific region as being kind of front of mind. And certainly the share of trade with the Pacific and China being a forefront of those has grown a lot. But we're still predominantly focused in terms of jobs and also inputs to production is really Canada and Mexico. So while the news of the day certainly seems to be around the Pacific, I think here getting a updated NAFTA or U.S. Mexico Canada agreement is going to be as important or more important than the Pacific trade agreements. TPP certainly was a lost opportunity for the region because we are heavily concentrated in trade there, but we don't want to focus on only TPP and Asia in terms of the types of trade agreements that are going to be beneficial to the region. And I think that's important to reinforce and was strongly seen in the data.
Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's also good news that President Trump and President Xi are speaking to each other off the media, and I think it takes a little tension away. And I think that while the U.S. is only 5% of the global population, we're much larger, 20% of the world's economy, I think, roughly, with China and Europe. I guess Europe and China, right? Number 2 and 3. But obviously, for us to continue to grow, we need to be part of those growing economies. And we can't sustain Oregon companies and manufacturers off just the U.S. economy. We've got to be in the global marketplace. And I think updating and modernizing the trade agreements that exist is really important, and that they touch and include the broadest portion of the segment of the economy as possible. And I think that some agreements have left people behind, and I think it's important that those get addressed and the agreements get modernized. And I think with NAFTA, for example, the labor agreements, environmental agreements were sidebar letter agreements, not chapters in the text of the agreement. And clearly the digital economy has evolved since those agreements were put in place, and .com wasn't really a thing when they drafted a lot of it. So I think it's important to modernize it, and I think for us, we've got to continue to advocate for trade agreements, and that we do modernize, and that we do open our eyes to who are impacted by these agreements positively, and who are negatively impacted, and that we address those concerns legitimately and take on those challenges and make sure that we're including a broader segment. But we have to advocate. And I think our elected officials need to hear that. Trade can't be a bad word. It's good for Oregon. It's good for this port. And I think we have to continue to advocate the positive sides of it, and make sure that they're seeing that it isn't a bad word. Politically, we're going into another cycle, and I think for all of us, we have an obligation to communicate how important it is. And I just want to emphasize that. I think the value of your work is there. I mean, the port couldn't exist really without trade. The economics for us would erode to nothing. So I think, and that includes travel and tourism, right? I mean, when people are moving, that's really a segment of trade. But anyway, so it's more of a comment, less of a question. But thank you for the work. And I think educating people is what this is all about, and we all can play a part in that. So thank you for the work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think part of this is, broadly speaking, the business community is pretty aware of these things. And what's, I think, unique about Portland Business Alliance is they brought in essentially the federal advocacy arm into their organization. And they say that they're the only local chamber of commerce that has a federal delegate sitting inside them through PNITA, so Pacific Northwest International Trade Association. So I think they're keenly focused on making sure that they have a unified message when they approach the delegates in Washington. And certainly Senator Wyden and Congressman Blumenauer are important figures nationally. So I think this report, they had a keen interest in seeing it, and I think it's been communicated to them and their staff. So I think as the business community continuing to engage in as many places as possible is key to get that message out. So yeah, thank you.
Please.
I also want to thank you very much for the report. It really was fascinating. And I have a question that sort of is on the periphery of, I'm sure, some of your research, but I know that economists are not bound by limitations. I mean, your lenses take you to a lot of places. One of the slides that you showed looked at a projection of growth in international trade going forward, with clearly skewing towards growth in interactions with China. And we think about that as a trading partner, but at the same time, they're also becoming an arbitrator of where international growth will take place around the world. Their focus on investment within the African continent far exceeds ours. So when you begin to look at not only what they will control, what they will influence is also going to grow tremendously. Can you opine at all on the seemingly myopic viewpoint we've taken around investment in emerging economies that are not our traditional partners?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that has to do with the traditional trade agreements that we've had. They've been so focused on primarily, NAFTA and our European partners. And we see in Oregon, we're trading with over 150 countries nationally. So I think here in Oregon, we're much more diverse in terms of the places that we're trading. But yes, it's a small part of, it's heavily concentrated in a few areas in the world. And I'm not exactly sure of all the reasons for why that is. And I think in many places of the country specifically, we're still exporting essentially, raw materials, fuel, et cetera. And the demand for those in some of those emerging markets isn't there. So I think the opportunity for strategic involvement in terms of placing facilities there that are going to be key parts of value add manufacturing and others is that key connection rather than focusing on resource extraction. And Oregon certainly fits the bill for that type of trade. So yeah.
Other questions or comments? Thank you, Dr. Wilkerson.
Yeah, my pleasure.
If you could come introduce the first agenda item, please.
So good morning. I'm here with Abby Carey, who's our Concessions Development Manager, and we're really excited about the opportunity to talk about our latest round of concessions awards. As you know, we went through a round, or 3 rounds actually, of revisiting some of the existing concessions and changed out about 2/3 of the program. But now we're looking at additional spaces with the Concourse E extension, which will open in June of next year, and then the Concourse B remodel as well. So we identified several new areas where we needed some new concessions. As you know, we go through a robust process when we do this. We're taking into account the needs of the passengers, businesses, certainly the airlines, obviously the employees as well are very interested in what the opportunities are here as well. So all with the goal of keeping PDX as America's best airport. It is part of a significant element of the program here is the concessions, and the team does a terrific job of hiring the right folks and getting the right businesses in here. As we've gone through the process, we've made some enhancements here recently in terms of trying to encourage more small business to participate. So we made some changes in the requirements for submittals, which Abby will go through, and also trying to make sure we're getting quality employers. As you've heard over the years here, we want to make sure that we've got the right folks here that are treating employees well, with good wages, benefits, and so on. And so that was a key part of our program as well. We're thankful for our existing concessionaires that are here, and we're gonna welcome some new ones, and then we're also going to have some of our existing folks continue on as well. So I'm going to let Abby go through the whole process here, and I think hopefully you'll be excited about the options that are in front of you.
All right. Thank you, Vince. Good morning. We are here this morning seeking your approval to enter 9 new lease agreements for new spaces, 7 of which are in the Concourse E extension and 2 of which are in the upcoming Concourse B remodel project. So this effort has actually been underway for over a year now, and we released an RFP, request for proposals, last winter, and it turned out to be the most competitive RFP for concessions that PDX has ever issued. We received some incredibly impressive proposals and had some very, very difficult decisions to make, but ultimately we feel good about the recommendations we're bringing forward. If you could please advance the slide. Thank you. So you can see our recommendations here on the screen, and I am going to go through each of these in a little bit more detail in a moment here. But first, I just wanted to start with a little bit of background on why our concessions program is so important at PDX. Next slide, please. So the passenger experience is absolutely the highest priority of everybody at PDX. And the concessions program is a major component, plays a large role in that passenger experience. The concessions program is able to communicate a sense of place through the flavors and sights and sounds of our region here, and really connect passengers to the community and provide a variety of diverse options for whatever passengers are looking for, whether it's a local brand or a national brand. It is always a consistent element in our awards. Just like our award we heard about this morning. So I'm sure the concessions play a role there always. And financially, it's very important to the airport overall because revenue from rents go back to the airlines to offset their costs of doing business here. So the airlines are actually very, very supportive. Locations on Concourse E. 3 quick serve counter service restaurant locations on Concourse E, and 1 full service bar with food at the end of Concourse E. And then over on Concourse B, we've got another full service restaurant and a specialty coffee location coming in. So these are the 9 locations that were put in the request for proposals we issued last winter. Next slide. So a little bit on our solicitation process. It, like I mentioned, began last summer, actually. We did a massive outreach campaign where we spoke with nearly all of our existing tenants here to share the upcoming opportunities and just reached out to the community as broadly as we possibly could to make sure that every business in the community knew about the opportunities here and had the chance to participate in our process. So we ended up issuing the request for proposals at the end of January this year, and in May we received 42 proposals for the 9 spaces. Throughout the month of May, we had a 5-member selection committee review the proposals and evaluate each one. The selection committee was made up of both internal and external stakeholders to the port. And we also utilized some subject matter experts from the port on some specialized areas like financial analysis and analysis of wages and benefits packages and things like that are a bit more nuanced. So next slide, please. The evaluation criteria that the selection committee used to make their decisions is here on the screen. I'm not going to go through each of these in detail, but I do want to highlight a few key components here to these items that were areas of focus and improvements that we made to the process. As Vince mentioned, we are very focused on lowering the barriers to entry for small businesses and really having opportunities for all out here. So several of these improvements were designed with that in mind. First of all, we made some improvements to the sustainability plan section of the proposals. PDX does an amazing job with waste minimization and environmental programs in general, but we really wanted to start looking at some of the smaller, more detailed things that we could do to reduce our waste, essentially. So specifically, reducing the use of single-use plastics was something we called out in the RFP that we wanted concessionaires to really compete on and kind of raise the bar on what we can do to improve our waste production there. So we ended up getting some very, very innovative proposals. I think each one, all 9 of the locations will be using compostables instead of single-use plastics and really making some improvements there. We are going to be attaching those commitments to the subsequent leases so that these commitments are carried out through the life of the lease and consistently applied. The next improvement that we made to our process was in the design section, and this I think was probably the most heavily weighted improvement we made. We typically, and this is typical for all airports really in the country, request architectural renderings for a submittal. And those can cost upwards of $20,000 for a small business to put together a proposal that may or may not even be successful. And if it's not successful, they're obviously out that money just for having participated in our process. And that's certainly not in line with our values for inclusion. So we eliminated that altogether. We in our request for proposals said that all you need to do is submit your design intent and a narrative of how you're going to approach the space, but that we will handle all of the other details through our robust design review process that each successful proposal will go through. So it's a little bit of a risk to us, just because we don't know exactly what we're getting in terms of how the space will look. But again, we have confidence in our design review process that we'll achieve some beautiful spaces here. So I do think that had a big impact on the proposals we received, and the fact that this was the most competitive RFP in the history of PDX for concessions. We, like I said, received 42 proposals, which is significantly more than we have in the past on a similar number of spaces. The other area I'd like to focus on is the quality employer plan. As many of you know, this is something that we always have in our request for proposals. We've had this in its similar form for the last 3 RFPs we've done, and it's always weighted very heavily. It's 25% of the overall score for the proposal. So very important piece of the overall proposal. So this time, though, we really wanted to focus on what really makes a difference in the day-to-day lives of employees. So wages and benefits were really a key focus. In the past, we've kind of applied our scoring evenly with other awesome things like free parking and discounts and things like that. But those aren't the things that really make the day-to-day difference to employees. So we ended up within that 25% weighting wages and benefits as 80% of that overall 25%. So definitely prioritized the employers who are willing to invest in their employees. Other criteria, you can see we did have a airport disadvantaged business enterprise participation goal of 15% for food and beverage and 11% for retail. We far exceeded those goals in our current RFP, and I will talk about that a bit in a moment here. And then just our standard financial analysis and site visit evaluations as well. Next, please. Thank you. So I'm going to take a moment to just go through each of the locations here, starting with Concourse E and starting on the west end on the left. At the very beginning of the new extension, we have Tender Loving Empire recommended. This will be their second PDX location and their 6th overall location. They're a small local business, local retailer. They've been a great partner thus far, and we're excited to continue the partnership with them. Next, in one of the quick serve locations is Tillamook. I don't think I need to say much more about Tillamook aside from the fact that it's obviously an Oregon heritage brand. Very, very proud to have such a key figure in our local scene here as part of this mix. Tillamook will be operating a counter service restaurant serving burgers and ice cream and all kinds of other things, plus a retail counter where you can buy your cheese curds and all that stuff on your way out the door. Next door to Tillamook, we have Evergreens, which is a slightly new to the area mini chain. They're based in Seattle. They have quite a few locations up there, including one at SeaTac, but they've just entered the Oregon market, having opened 2 new locations this spring, and this will be their 3rd Oregon location. It's a salad bar concept, so we're really excited to offer new, fresh, healthy options for our passengers and employees. And then the 3rd and final quick serve option is Bambuza. This is their 2nd space at PDX, and they have been awesome partners out here for the last 5 or so years, and we're thrilled to see them expand at PDX with a 2nd location on the north side. Across from there, we have 2 smaller spaces. The first is going to be owned and operated by CC McKinsey, who operates 2 stores out here at PDX already. Those 2 stores that are existing are focused on shoes and apparel, but this new concept is going to have a new name. It will actually be called Calliopes, and it will focus on accessories and gift items. So really a fun souvenir shop and something brand new for PDX. Next, we actually have Jamba Juice, which is our only national brand in the package we're recommending today. As I mentioned previously, it's important that we have a mix of local and national brands to serve different passenger desires. So this is our kind of shout out to the local brands. And, we used to have a Jamba Juice here several years ago. It was always very popular and a big hit with employees. It's healthy and affordable and just kind of a great snack add-on item. So happy to have them returning. And then down at the very end of Concourse E, we have a larger full-service restaurant and bar space that's going to be run by Lightning Bar Collective. They are bringing in a brand new concept, which they will be calling Juliet. And it is an homage to historic women in aviation. So it's really going to have some cool imagery of Amelia Earhart and the like, and really be kind of a fun airport-themed restaurant we're very excited for. Lightning Bar Collective tends to focus on vegan fare, and they will definitely have meat options for all of their menu items, but we're really excited to expand our plant-based offerings here at PDX. Definitely a sense of place for Portland. Next, please. So over to Concourse B, we have screendoor operated by HMS Host going into the largest space there, the full service dining. I think that one thus far has generated a ton of excitement, and I know the community is excited to potentially not have to wait in a line that goes around the block to get into to the airport version of screendoor. We'll see. But this location is the only food and beverage, or the only restaurant on Concourse B. Concourse B will be serving 18% of our passengers once it's remodeled. So we really needed this one to have broad appeal, and we feel that screendoor hits that mark. And then down on the lower level below, in the ground level hold room, we have a specialty coffee that we are recommending award to Good Coffee. They are a local coffee shop, and we're really excited to expand our local Portland coffee mix with what we have already here in the airport. So now that I've gone through kind of our process and the specifics on the locations, I just wanted to mention a few key interesting figures that came out of this regarding the results. So the out of the 9 new leases, 4 of them are going to existing concessionaires that we're already partnered with, and 5 are going to partners that are brand new to the airport. So we have a great balance of kind of expanding our PDX family and opening it up to new participants also. Out of the 9, 6 are completely locally owned and operated. So that, again, extension of the community and sense of place is very strong there. 7 out of the 9 have ACDBE commitments. I mentioned earlier that our goal for this RFP was 15% for food and beverage and 11% for retail. We actually, in this RFP, ended up achieving 43% overall for all the concessions. So that means that 43% of these incoming concessions are women and minority owned. So just really awesome numbers there. We, in the quality employer plans that proposers submit, we ask for some specific numbers when it comes to employees and wages and lots of specific data. And from that data, we were able to gather that these 9 new locations will be adding 254 new jobs to PDX. And the average wages for starting frontline entry-level employees, when you account for tips and bonuses too, is between $20.38 and $26.35 an hour. So definitely competitive wages that we're able to offer out here with these new leases. Please. Wanted to just go through a little refresher on the business terms, although our business terms are very standard and we have not made any changes to them with this RFP, so this will look familiar to you. Our leases for retail are 7 years long, and our leases for food and beverage are 10 years long. The reason that the food and beverage leases are a little bit longer is because the upfront investment is typically greater for food and beverage. So we allow a little bit more term to just help amortize that additional investment. Rent out here, we do not charge rent on a square footage basis. It's all a tiered percentage of sales. So it's tiered with the intent that as the concessionaire is more successful, the port is more successful, and then it also works in the opposite direction. And then we always have a minimum annual guarantee, which is basically sets the floor for rent. Aside from that, some of our standard business terms, the initial investment and a midterm refurbishment are funded by the concessionaires, and they also fund their own utilities based on consumption. They also pay for storage by the square foot. And then we have a number of other standard business terms that address customer service standards, operating hours, all the little nitty-gritty details. So finally, I just wanted to go through our next steps and talk a bit about the timeline. Following today's recommendation, we hope to begin design on the Concourse E spaces immediately and expect to begin construction in early next year in time to be open when the Concourse E extension opens in June 2020. The Concourse B locations are about 8 months behind that because that project is about 8 months behind Concourse E. So right now it's estimated to open in March of 2021, and that is when the concessions will be ready to open as well. So next slide, please. With that, I'm happy to take any questions, or if you prefer to have public comment prior to questions, however you'd like to.
Madam President.
Please.
Yes. As EVP and CFO of Tillamook Creamery, I have an interest in any action that affects the company, and therefore I'm declaring an actual conflict of interest, and I won't participate in the vote or the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
I do have a question, but whenever I have time to do so.
Sure. Commissioner Suruda, please go ahead.
Oh, can I do that now?
Yes.
Thank you very much. And a job extremely well done in terms of process and the transparency and some of the criteria that you employed in the entire process. Mm-hmm. I have just a quick business terms related question.
Sure.
Which consists of three, smaller pieces of questions. Mm-hmm.
Sure.
In terms of rent,
Mm-hmm.
you said there is no per square foot rent, but there is rent which is based upon at the greater of either the $80 per square foot per year or a percentage of the business subject business gross or this and that, right? So there is a rent. No, my question is, how does that $80 per square foot per year rent, how does that compare to other practices of other airlines in the country? That's
So-
number one.
Okay.
Can I go over two
Of
more?
course, of
Okay.
course.
Then, in terms of the greater of, therefore, that or 11% or 10% or whatever, the given annual business done by the subject lessee, you're the lessor, right? Is that of the total growth, gross revenue, or the operating profit, or net? So that's the question. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Those are the two questions.
Okay.
And I think that will take enough time, so I'm going to skip the third.
Okay, thank you for the mercy. So your question on the minimum annual guarantee, for the first full lease year, it's set artificially low at $80 a square foot, which is very low. That is intended to sort of force the percentage rent to set a standard for the second full lease year going forward. In the second full lease year, the minimum annual guarantee is not $80 per square foot. It's 80% of the previous year's sales. Yeah. So, and then whatever is greater between the percentage rent and that sort of floor number is the number that the port applies. And as in terms of how that compares to other airports, the $80 per square foot is, again, certainly not the intent for the term of the lease. That's very low, and that would be very low at other airports. But the 80% of the previous year's sales is in line with other airports, and it's also it's helpful because it gives a little bit of a safety net if there is some kind of economic downturn or disastrous event that causes sales to plummet, that you're always that the most you would pay in that situation is 20% less than you had paid the previous year, if that makes sense. And then your other question about net versus gross revenue sales, the rent is taken off of gross sales.
Gross sales.
Yes.
That's all I need to know.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, keeping in mind that it's Mr. Granado's birthday and we might want to grant mercy? Okay, I think we have community members signed up to speak, so I will call you, and if you could come up and tell us who you are and what agency or organization you're representing. I have Daryl Benton and Nicole Moten. I'm not sure if you want to come together or...
Good morning and afternoon. I'm Daryl Benton, Executive Vice President, Business Development for HMS Host. And we would like to thank you, Chairman, Council Commissioner, as well as all the commissioners. I also, former president of the Urban League, I send my regards from Mark Morrell. I was with him last week at the Essence Festival and knew I would be speaking before you. We're very excited to be a partner here at your airport, but today we're really excited to really have Nicole from Screendoor speak to you. Last night I was there. Oh my goodness, if you've not been there, the fried okra, the fried catfish, the fried chicken. I did have a baked scallop just to make sure, and the fresh green beans. But oh my goodness! So I did have a little vegetables.
We do have healthy options.
Yeah, the health. But I avoided all the healthy options, notwithstanding Chair that they were there. And then the desserts. I started with one first to augment my green beans. But I'll stop there and really tell you and your staff how excited HMS Host is to be in this airport. We do operate a few national brands, Starbucks, but mostly your local iconic Portland concepts. But Nicole, tell us more about the partnership and how excited you are to bring your brand to the airport.
Absolutely. We are thrilled to be here. We are a local brand. We are self-made. We've been in business this is our 13th year now, and this is our first venture outside of our little store on East Burnside. So we're absolutely thrilled to be here and be a part of the airport.
And if I can, I would like to just ask if our partners and our staff could stand. Our general manager here at the airport, Jody, is here. If you'll just stand. We have Amy Dunn, our Vice President, Business Development, who led this effort. We have our two ACDBE partners. Your goal was 15%. We exceeded that at 20%. Simeon Stewart, as well as Michael Washington. And the person who really hit the groundwork here on the ground and found this brand, Chris, our restaurant developer, gets all the credit for finding Nicole. So again, thank you all very much. And staff, we really thank you for this recommendation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, I have Catherine Lamb and Genevieve Antoinette. Genevieve and Antoinette.
Here, you guys stay here with me. Okay. Oh, thank goodness.
Well, good morning, Madam President, Commissioners, and Director Robin Holt. My name is Catherine Lamb, and today I'm joined with two of my bosses. Do you want to introduce your name?
My name is Genevieve. My name is Antoinette.
My husband Daniel and I own Bambusa Hospitality Group, and we're truly honored to be here with you today. We are delighted to have this opportunity to continue to grow our business here at the airport. But first off, I'd like to thank Shane and Abby and the concession development team for their hard work in putting this RFP together, and also their extensive outreach efforts. I also want to thank the Port of Portland Commission and the executive team for your leadership in reaching out to small businesses like ours and to open doors for local community to thrive and to prosper. I also want to most importantly thanks the one who really started it all, is Daniel's mom, Mama Lan, and she's in the room today. She's about my height. Who was the first making spring rolls at Farmers Market nearly 40 years ago. To all of us, she set a great example of commitment and perseverance. She demonstrated a deep desire to care for the people around her. And with me today, the next generation of female entrepreneurs, that is our daughter, Genevieve and Antoinette. Opportunities like this show our girls that when we take risks and put ourselves out there, anything is possible. It lets them see what hard work and a strong commitment to our values can bring, and the chance it offers us to give back to our community. But none of this would be possible without combined efforts of our dedicated staff, our supportive family, and the Port community. Again, we thank you for believing in us and for extending your vote of confidence today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Say thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Linda Flatwood.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Linda Flatwood. I am one of the owners of C.C. McKinsey Shoes and Apparel. C.C. McKinsey currently operates 2 stores in the airport. One is located in the Oregon Market, and one is located in the C Concourse. Joining me today, and I will have them stand up, are several of my family members who help run our company. My son, Matthew Flatwood, my daughter-in-law, Rebecca Flatwood, and my daughter, Sarah Flatwood, who hyphenates her name with Hanley. 10 years ago, Scott Kilgore with the Port was instrumental in recommending that our shoe and clothing store be awarded a lease at PDX. The Port of Portland took a chance on our concept in the airport and awarded C.C. McKinsey our first airport lease. For that, we would like to thank you. Over the next 5 years, the Port of Portland awarded C.C. McKinsey 2 more leases, one a short-term lease and one long-term lease. For those leases, we also want to thank you. Owning and operating retail stores at the Portland Airport is more than a dream come true. Our family feels truly blessed to be given these opportunities. The work is very hard, but rewarding both financially and emotionally. The Port of Portland staff, including Shane Anderson, Abby Carey, and of course Walt Froman, to name just a few, are wonderful to work with. Today, C.C. McKinsey is thrilled to be given another opportunity to grow in the airport community with our new concept store, which we have named Calliope's, a store focusing on accessories and gifts, which will enhance the already award-winning passenger experience at PDX. We would like to thank both the selection committee and the Port of Commissioners for awarding us this new lease. We look forward to many more years as retail partners. Thank you for your time.
Audrey Crespo.
Good morning. I'm Audrey Crespo, the creative director at Tillamook Creamery. And
I'm Paige Jim, the program manager for our retail projects at the Tillamook Creamery.
we are here to represent our farmer owners and employees who are very excited for this opportunity and are honored to even be considered as part of many of the other Oregon brands that are represented. And we are looking forward to this being our second location. If all of you have already been or know of the Tillamook Creamery in the Coast, this will be our first location outside of Tillamook, and hopefully not the last. And we're really looking forward to sharing our the Tillamook brand love with the airport guests, and really being a part of this kind of amazing experience that you have done so well of extending to your passengers here in Oregon. That we really feel that you have elevated that for Portland, and we're looking forward to being part of that experience as well.
Thank you very much. Brienne Nice.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brienne Nice. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Tender Loving Empire. I'm here today with my co-CEO and videographer and husband, Jared Meese, and our CFO, COO, Terry St. Marie, and our PDX retail manager, Betsy Cortez, who have all had a huge part in our success so far at PDX. We have absolutely loved being a part of the PDX family for the last 2.5 years. It has just been a really special place to do business, and we're immensely grateful for the opportunity to open a second location in Concourse E. It's been an absolute honor to represent the phenomenal creativity of the artisans and makers of our community to the millions of people that walk through the doors at PDX. And I just wanted to take an opportunity to thank each of you and everyone involved in the decision making for your ongoing support of small and local businesses. I can assure you I've seen firsthand the great impact, positive impact that it has had on the individuals in our community. The choice to award Tender Loving Empire a space in this RFP is not only a choice to support our small and family-owned business, but it is also a choice to support hundreds of other small businesses that we represent, that we bring along with us, and I wanted to thank you all on their behalf as well. Just another note, we're just thrilled to bring our special brand of warm and enthusiastic TLE customer service to Concourse E as well, and we promise to continue to partner with you all in your already great efforts to make and keep Portland, the Portland Airport, the #1 airport in the U.S. So thank you again for the opportunity. We're really grateful.
Before I call for a motion and second, I want to say I really appreciate Port staff's work on both ensuring that we continue to have top flight concessions here at our airport. I think they are really one of the keys that in terms of folks' travel experience, and also the recognition of barriers to entry that are often in place for small businesses to be able to participate in a process like this, to really thinking about that ahead of time and trying to ease those burdens for folks, I think is really important. If there are no other comments or questions, I'll call for a motion and second to approve the recommendation.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Sorry, I just want to have one more comment I left out. It's we have our team here, and if I forgot to introduce them. Can you please stand up, our team?
No,
That's the whole gang.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. We have a motion and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Vince, you have our next agenda item.
Come on, George. Let's follow that. Our next item here is regarding the Terminal Core project. We've been here a number of different times, and we'll continue to be here over the next few years with various changes and adjustments to this over time. We were here earlier this year, did an amendment to the ZGF contract for design and construction, and here we're doing an amendment, a public improvement contract amendment with Hoffman Skanska for some additional staffing needs from September of 2019 and May 2020 for the terminal apron relamping construction activities, and I'll let George do it from here.
Okay, thank you, Vince. Next slide. So today we're asking for an amendment for the Hoffman Skanska contract of about $8.1 million. Some of the overarching goals, as we've talked about before about TCOR, is we're improving the seismic resiliency of the terminal building by growing the building 180 feet to the west and building an addition that meets today's current standards. We're designing the building to handle 34 million annual passengers, which is about a 70% increase from what we're doing today, but designing flexibility in both the security checkpoints as well as the ticket lobby so we can react to changes that occur in both security and ticketing in the future. The energy utilization intensity of the current building, which is a measure of the amount of energy use per square foot, is about 220. Today at the terminal building, our goal with TCOR is to get that under 100 for the entire terminal complex. And clearly we want to keep the world-class customer service for which we're known. To date, the airlines have approved phase 1 of the project, which includes the construction of the western expansion, the relocation of security checkpoints into the western expansion, the relocation of the current concession nodes, which are post-security, into the intersections of Concourse C and D and the western expansion. Project approval to date includes the demolition of Concourse A and the reconstruction of Concourse B. As Curtis mentioned, we anticipate going to ballot for the airlines within the next month for phase 2 of the project, which will include the remodel of the ticket lobby as well as the current nodes and atriums at the end of the security checkpoints. Last March, Commission approved an amendment to Hoffman Skanska contract that included replacement of a number of the passenger boarding bridges that have reached the end of their useful life. Today, we're asking for approval to amend the contract to include the terminal apron relamp installation, because a lot of the locations where the relamp is going to occur are the same spots where the passenger boarding bridges are being replaced. This gives us an opportunity to minimize the disruption to operations where we're doing construction work, as well as reducing costs for the project by able to maintain the same contractors doing both portions of work. This is an image of a pilot plant that our pilot lamp replacement that we did at D10. The new lamps are over top of the Hawaiian plane there. The new lamps are LED lamps with white light, which will be much brighter on the ramp itself, less light pollution, a longer lasting and simpler replacement. So we intend to continue to replace the lights as we go around the terminal. Project was kicked off in 2015. We've been in front of the Commission for a number of times for amendments to the ZGF contract, for Turner Construction, for early construction administration support, Burns and McConnell for commissioning, as well as the Hoffman Skanska contract. With this upcoming ballot with the airlines, we'll be bringing a number of agenda items in the future to Commission for continued construction GMPs. The design of the project is ongoing. We've completed schematic design. We'll be going through 2021 for the main portion of the project. From a construction perspective, the Concourse B work has already begun with the enabling work, which will enable the relocation of the Horizon operations in November timeframe from Concourse A to the end of Concourse C. That'll enable us to then remove the end of Concourse B, demo Concourse A, and construct the Concourse B addition, which will start in November and be complete by March of 2021. For the T-Core project itself, by the end of this year, early next year, we should start the enabling work to prepare for the new columns to hold up the roof, which will be done kind of behind bag claim. The passengers won't see that. And then once the Concourse E extension is complete next June, we'll start the work to take down gates C2 and C4 and do the utility activities that will occur in the alleyway between Concourses C and D for overall about a 5-year construction project. To date, Commission has approved and we've awarded contracts for Hoffman Skanska for about $44 million, which includes their staffing time for pre-construction activities, the passenger boarding bridge contract, and the Concourse B enabling work. This additional $8.1 million will extend the Hoffman Skanska staffing through May of next year, and the terminal relamp project for a little over $52 million total contract. So over the next year and a half or so, we'll bring a number of amendments to Commission for construction activities related to the project. We're going to try to combine these if we can, and the numbers are still preliminary. But in general, in the fall time, we bring in about $130 million worth of contract amendments for the main Concourse B construction project, which is out to bid right now. The materials pre-purchase for the seismic isolators, for the roof construction, as well as the enabling work to install the columns for T-Core. Next spring, we'll bring contracts for about $200 million for the utility relocations, take all the utilities that are existing on the footprint of the western expansion, and they'll be moved out outside of the building, as well as the structural for the building, and then towards the end of next year, the guaranteed maximum price for the remainder of the project. Overall project budget as approved today from the airlines is $950 million. As Curtis mentioned, our updated budget is $1.63 billion, which includes a little over $1 billion for construction activities. Contingency on the project is about 17%, which we feel is commensurate with the amount of work that the design and construction team have done to date, as well as the risk associated with this project. The funding is for the airline, is all through the Airline Cost Center. Our construction small business participation goal is been established at 20%. To date, the Concourse B enabling work, which is in predominantly lower C, is about $7.5 million of work and is over 75% small business participation. Staff request approval of the Executive Director's recommendation.
Thank you. Questions?
Thank you. So, and I don't know if this is maybe where this question should be directed, but obviously the amendments are big numbers and consequential to the size of the project. My question is that expected and normal operating procedures that we scope the project to the best possible, but we know there are contingencies that will drive the cost up, and these are expected in the overall vision for the project. So just clarity on it.
Yeah, let me take a crack at it and then I'll defer to George. Broadly, you're right. We set out early to try to get our arms around what the number is and do a relatively specific number at 10%. And as we move through the process, we're seeking to gain efficiencies if we can find them. You get some surprises as well. So I'd say that is broadly expected. We do our very best to keep the top line number, the budget number, the same, and so we're working within the number as we come for contract amendments. But broadly, we want to be as transparent as possible. As we discover these things, we're going to bring them forward. As an example, moving a project into the CONRAC, the RCC, which is really part of T-Core, you have to change those numbers around to make it work, but the top line numbers all stay the same. It's about bringing contracts through. As we know, they have to be adjusted. Did that?
I think that answered it. And then the amendments are covered within the scope of our bonding.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
That answered my question. Thank you.
And this is, Madam
Please.
President, it's probably more my education than anything. The initial budget, when we approved, does have a significant contingency. What's the relationship of these amendments to that contingency number? I mean, does it fall outside of it? Is it?
Let me do another broadly. Stays within. So as we start, contingency starts at a relatively high number, and as you progress through the project, you narrow that contingency, obviously. So we're staying within those numbers, and we'll alert you if they're not in some way. I can't think of one since I've been here that we've gone outside the range of contingency. We have a very good track record of delivering within the budget and the contingency number. So maybe specifics about contingency and
Yes.
these contract
So
amendments.
each of the to a point, future contract amendments have a proportion that is established with contingency. One of my goals as the PM, and I've challenged the team, is we have individual target value designs for each of those amendments that you see. So we as a team are able to track how the project is doing in the big picture as we go forward. So between now and next March, we probably have if I remember the math, $350 million worth of amendments that are coming forward, and we should be tracking to about those numbers. If we're not, that informs us. That says we need to be looking at the rest of the project for how do we adjust the design, adjust the scope, so we bring it in within the overall guidelines of the project. And we'll be keeping track as we go of what the project contingency and how it is being utilized.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, George.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll call for a motion and second to approve the recommendation.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Stan?
Good morning. Port of Portland Navigation Division and the workers on the Dredge Oregon are represented by the International Union of Operating Engineers Local 701. The union and the port began negotiations and bargaining in April 2019 for successor contract. Our current agreement with the union expired at the end of last month. So we are here today. I'm here along with Blaise Lamphere, who is our Port Labor Relations Manager, and we are here to get your approval for our new 4-year contract with the operating engineers. Blaise, take it away.
Thank you, Stan.
Yep.
Good morning. Very pleased to be here this morning with this matter. The issues in this most recent round of bargaining were streamlined relatively quickly. It was an aggressive schedule. We had 4 sessions, extended sessions during a 1-month period, and happily were able to reach agreement ratification by the membership on this contract. Key terms, so if you can hit the next slide. Key terms on this contract, financially first, in terms of wages, we looked at, and again, as background, one of the things, or several things we consider in this regard, we look at the market overall. With this group particularly, we're looking at the prevailing wage rate. We look at CPIW. Traditionally, that had been, with this group, the Portland-Salem Index, which was around for 30 years and then eliminated in 2018 by the feds. So we had to negotiate a replacement index there. And also, while statutorily we're not required to look internally at the other groups if they're not comparables, we do look internally here at the port at our other represented groups and the benefits, wages and benefits they might have. So in looking at this particular group, we negotiated for the first year a $1.25 per hour increase for all classifications, the 5 classifications. that they have. It's a weighted average of 3% across the board for those individuals, the lowest being 2.8 and the highest 3.4 when rounded. The new index we negotiated, which we have in 5 of our agreements, now this being the 6th one, we went to West Class A size cities, second half as well. That assists with planning. Looking at that index with the 3 years, as you can see, a 1 to 5 minimum to max of 4 in year 2 and 2 to 4 in years 3 and 4 of this agreement. Health and welfare, traditionally it's a Taft-Hartley trust. This is one of 3 agreements that gets where the employees get their health care through a trust, and one of 2 with the Taft-Hartley Trust. We are not represented on that trust. It is through the private sector. AGC has a representation on it. As I say, we've received health care through this trust for about over 30 years at this point. Any increases that the trust makes throughout the life of this agreement are borne by the employees. If they make any shifts or changes to it, this is the same rate we had in the last contract, and we're informed that the healthcare trust is very stable, so they are keeping that rate the same presently. Next slide. In the retirement, we continue to pay for eligible regular employees, even though this is our only seasonal represented group. Several individuals have worked many years for us and returned year after year. And so we continue to make contributions into PERS and OPSERP. Of course, everyone hired now would be under OPSERP. Any increase, we also pay into their, for those who are not yet eligible, our new employees for the first 6 months, we pay into the trust pension fund, what is the equivalent of our payments, it never exceeds it, equivalent of our payments into PERS OPSERP for an individual who would be eligible. Occasionally, the trust wish to shift the amount that's allocated from defined benefit to defined contribution. We have no objection to that, and as long as the total remains the same and does not exceed what we would contribute otherwise if they were already eligible. For holidays, we eliminated in this round the presidential election day. All of our employees live in either Oregon or Washington, and we have mail-in ballots, of course, in both states, so that seemed to be something that could be jettisoned. We added President's Day instead as a holiday with this group. Employees traditionally, and they will continue to do so, if they work, they receive double time if they work on one of the holidays. In other words, they receive straight pay for 8 hours if they're working an 8-hour day, and 8 hours of straight time premium because they are working on a holiday. Those who do not work the holiday, and this is new, receive 8 hours equivalent of straight time pay. That makes this group consistent with our other trades, and we thought that was an important step to take in terms of internal equity with our other trade groups, represented groups. Traditionally in this contract, maintenance work, maintenance on equipment, or non-dredge work has been paid at a rate lower than the regular rate of pay, even though that work was within the classification for these individuals. We thought that was odd and unusual from an equity standpoint. Over the years, that has been reduced in different rounds of bargaining. Most recently, it was a 4% reduction in pay that someone would have if they were doing maintenance work on their equipment. And we eliminated that reference entirely in this last round of bargaining. Next slide. The payday was changed from weekly to biweekly. It sounds like a small issue. It actually was something that the Army Corps of Engineers requested, so these are the only port employees being paid on a weekly basis now on a certified weekly payroll. Training, we are contributing 5 cents per hour for all hours that are actually worked by these employees to the International Training Fund. We wish to focus on being able to send some of our folks to the International Training Center, state-of-the-art center in terms of the areas that you see listed there: heavy equipment, crane operation, welding, safety and health training. We put a priority on safety and health training, and this is another avenue through which we can ensure that our folks are trained, and we think it's a goodwill gesture. This came up in the talks regarding the apprenticeship, a possible apprenticeship, and it also came up in discussions with what occurs in the private sector. This total per year amounts basically, if you look at current trends of hours, around $3,900 annually to this training fund. We did discuss apprenticeship extensively. We were interested in an apprenticeship that not only addresses the technical needs for those who are dredging, but more importantly, diversity needs that we have, and also we find that the union has. So this is an exciting time to see something like this developed. The parties have committed to having conversations over this. We want this to occur, so we have two components there that need to be discussed in the coming year with IUOE, and hopefully we'll have more news on that as we go forward. There was no, while there was an apprenticeship, there was no off-the-shelf dredging apprenticeship opportunity here yet, so we would have to create it. From an equipment standpoint, we continue to provide in this contract personal protective equipment. We expanded what we had provided in the past, including flashlights and some other pieces of equipment. Again, that's just part of a safety initiative and consciousness, and continuing to encourage those behaviors with this group. Next slide, please. The estimated financial impact. So we see over the life of the CBA, if we're talking new money here, that's where the $3.4 million comes from. Incrementally then in the last year, year 4 of this contract, it would be $1.2 million higher than it is currently. So that gives you an idea of how the breakdown occurs over the years. Most notably, increases and spikes occur because of pension contributions. That's really the primary thing that is fueling this here. So if there are any questions.
Please, Commissioner.
What makes up the West Class A CPI?
We were included in it initially when the change was first made, and we had to make the move, as Multnomah County did too as well. The threshold is it was 1.5 million and above, and it's 2.5 million and above now. We still find that tracks better with the Portland area, metro area, in terms of actual costs and increases in prices and such than the B, C, smaller cities do. So,
Okay. How many employees work under this contract?
43.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? We have one of those employees here, I think. No?
Frank Hildebrand, Teamsters, Local 305, and I just wanted to congratulate both parties on reaching an agreement and offer some advice for the long term. I would suggest that you open the door a little bit to your apprenticeship program. Our experience at Teamsters has been that some of the trade work is becoming less popular with younger people. And from our experience, I would suggest speaking more deliberately and opening up the concept of apprenticeship and introducing people from all backgrounds into trade work that supports families. It's a good program, and a lot of the labor unions are interested in trying to refamiliarize people with the concept of working wages in a trade. And that's a good trade. So we know that helps families and people. Not everything can be technology driven. We need craftsmen, we need people, we need expertise, and apprenticeship helps us build that. but it is a long-term process. You can't just say, open for business, you have to find people. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We'll definitely be keeping our eyes on the apprenticeship program as you try to build it here. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I'll call for a motion and second to approve the recommendation.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. A meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
With your text last night, I'm assuming this has to do with is Keith so we started looking in.
Oh, no wonder I didn't hear
Because we recognize it too. We need drivers everywhere.
Steel supplier is pretty much a
Right on. So our drivers are usually local. So we have some. We have some. So where you our haul is at about 116. Okay, right. Yeah, it's got kind of a complex. It's big. It's a big. So, stuff like that. Yeah. And then one has commercially freighted.